川普总统竞选办公室在7月13号当天晚上呢，就已经发出声明说，川普总统look forward to 就是说期待着来参加共和党全国代表大会，也就是说，川普总统不会因为枪击事件而缺席这个大会。在这个大会上呢，预计会正式的提名他为2024年共和党总统的候选人。另外呢，我们也有从国会听到的消息，有一些国会议员，包括像这个 Rules Committee 非常重要的一个委员会，他的主席是德州的共和党的议员，他本来是不准备来参加共和党大会的，现在呢也都来准备要参加了。那么其实呢，密尔瓦基市就是威斯康星州，包括这个密尔瓦基市它呢是目前呢在2024年是一个非常重要的关键战场州，或者说是摇摆州那么它为什么会是这样的一个重要的一个摇摆州呢？辛恬在之前也采访了当地的一个大学叫McKee University 它的法学院，他们呢是在威斯康星州是历年来都是做一个非常广泛的，可以说是最广泛的一个民调。那么他们今年的民调最新的民调对于今年大选的总统候选人在民意的支持度方面是什么样的呢？为什么会出现这样的一个情景那辛恬有采访了这个大学的一位重要的研究员，叫 Craig Gilbert， 他给我们做解释，我们一起来听一听。
So Craig, just for the record, introduce yourself.
My name is Craig Gilbert. I'm a columnist for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and I'm a fellow at the Marquette Law School.
So Wisconsin is now one of the key states now. So could you please tell our audience why now Wisconsin is a key battleground state?
So Wisconsin is one of the few states that has been a presidential swing state for decades. When I started covering politics, it was a swing state, and it's still a swing state. I think it's for a number of reasons, but it has a lot of rural voters in the countryside, it has a lot of suburban voters, and it has a lot of urban voters in the city. So that mix means that no one party dominates the electorate in Wisconsin, and even though Republicans have lost ground with voters in the suburbs and Democrats have lost ground with voters in the countryside, those two things have sort of canceled each other out over time. So our politics has changed dramatically, but Wisconsin has been an enduring battleground along with states like Pennsylvania.
So now, what do you think about this year's presidential election?
So every kind of indicator, up to recent events has been that this is a 50-50 election. I mean, our last two elections in Wisconsin with Donald Trump on the ballot were each decided by a fraction. And, all the polling has been 50-50. No matter how you ask the question, poll after poll, it's been 50-50. So that could change. Events can influence that. The debate could change that. What happened at the rally in Pennsylvania with Donald Trump could influence that. But basically the baseline in Wisconsin is a very evenly divided electorate for president, for all sorts of offices. So I don't think the election here will be decided by very many votes.
So how do you think yesterday the events, the shooting happened in Pennsylvania, how would it affect?
So it's so early. We don't have all the information. We have a lot of questions. I think it'll affect the Republican convention. I think it will have...
What way?
Well, I think it'll change the tone of the convention. I think there'll also be kind of a rallying effect among Republicans around Donald Trump. And but how it affects, the horse race, is hard to know because the state is already so dug in and the divisions are so concrete that there's not a lot of movement one way or the other in the electorate. But at the same time, it doesn't take very much movement to decide the outcome in a 50-50 state. It could be 1 point in either direction. And so along with other things that are going on, like President Biden's performance in the debate, and then a lot of things that are going to happen between now and November, whose voters turn out. These are all things that in a very close state can tip it in one direction or another.
Got it. So from what what's going on right now. Can you just tell us what are the main advantage and disadvantage for Republicans and otherwise for Democrats?
So in this state, Republicans have struggled during the Trump era. They've lost more elections than they've won, and a big reason is that they have lost ground among college-educated suburban voters. In Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, that used to be a very strong group for Republicans, unusually strong. But those margins have been shrinking ever since 2016. So that's a problem for Republicans. For Democrats, they've been losing ground with voters in rural parts of Wisconsin, where Democrats were actually pretty strong in the past. So that's a big problem for them. And turnout is a big question for Democrats because all the polling suggests that there's a lack of enthusiasm, particularly among Democratic voters. Among all voters, because a lot of voters don't like either candidate, but particularly among Democratic voters. And the question is whether that lack of enthusiasm translates in November into lower turnout.
Yeah, and what do you think? Why is you mentioned that the divide is very deep, and what is it and why is that?
So these are global trends and national trends, right? When you talk about what's happening, for example, when you look at the difference between voters who have a college education and voters who don't, when you look at the difference between voters who are very religious and voters who are not, or when you look at the difference between voters who live in metropolitan suburbs and cities and voters who live in rural counties and small towns, these are fault lines in our electorate that have been growing bigger. Some of them have been growing bigger across the world too. So it's not just a Wisconsin trend, it's kind of a big, powerful national and international trend, and it's continuing to shape our elections.
And if you were giving suggestions to Republicans and who's having the convention here, how to, what kind of suggestion would you give?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see, whether the Republicans try to broaden their appeal and whether Donald Trump tries to broaden his appeal, because he has this very impassioned base. But then you have voters in the middle that have a lot of qualms about him. Some of them may end up voting for him. Some of them may end up voting for his opponent. But what will he do? Will he try? Will he make the attempt to, answer some of those concerns, either in tone or rhetoric or substance? Or will he just sort of double down on, what he's said and how he said it in the past? So that's, I think, one of the questions that a lot of reporters and people who analyze politics are going to be watching in this convention and for the rest of the campaign.
And what do you think the most important issue that the independents are concerned about?
I think there's a lot of issues. Certainly the economy is around the top of the list. There may also be voters who are concerned about immigration. There may be voters who are concerned about abortion. There are obviously a lot of voters that are just concerned about our political culture, which is pretty troubled right now. And so there's no one magic issue to kind of, talk to all those voters who aren't dug in for either party. But I think some of it is just sort of tone and positioning.
And what kind of suggestion would you give to Democrat Party?
Well, the Democrats are just facing this massive question about Joe Biden and who their nominee is going to be ever since the debate. So that's the existential question for them, is do they stay with Joe Biden? Does Joe Biden decide to stay in the race? Or do they just, out of this crisis, just decide to throw a long pass and take their chances on either Vice President Harris or some other Democrat if they become convinced that Joe Biden's chances of winning the election are too low to stay with him? So I think that's what it's all about on the Democratic side, because it matters to the Democrats whether they can. It's up to the candidate on the Democratic side to make the case against Donald Trump, and if Democrats don't think Joe Biden can do that, it's a very difficult, hill for them to climb, and they're already, kind of the underdogs now. They're already in a disadvantaged position.
Wow. So, in summary, would you like to tell our audience about Wisconsin in the 2024 election?
So it's one of a very short list of states that will decide the election. It was, probably the most important state in the last 2 elections. It's the host of the convention. It's kind of on a knife's edge. So, and many people think that right now, the only real path or the most realistic path for Joe Biden to win the Electoral College in our system, where it's states that decide the election, is the combination of he has to win Wisconsin, he has to win Pennsylvania, and he has to win Michigan. Those are the 3 northern battleground states. So if he loses any of them, the chances of him winning a second term are very low.
Thank you, Greg.
Okay, good luck.